If you only had 5 minutes to talk with a friend who was an evolutionist, could you quickly topple the main pillars for evolution and present a strong case for creation? A quick and simple memory tool would be useful to help guide a discussion without breaking down into an argument. Today's guest will provide the skills necessary to talk intelligently with your friends and coworkers. Coming up on today's edition of Origins, 5 Minutes with a Darwinist with Dr. Randy Galuza. Hello and welcome to Origins. I'm Ray Heipel. It's an honor to be your host today. During this program, we showcase interesting guests who present evidence from science along with other important facts, validating the truth of creation and the accuracy of the Bible. Today's guest, Dr. Randy Galuza, has undergraduate degrees in engineering and theology and a Master of Public Health from Harvard University. In 2008, he retired as Lieutenant Colonel from the U.S. Air Force as a medical doctor. Now he's a speaker and author for the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas and has represented ICR in several scientific debates. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you so much, Ray. It's a joy to be here.
It's great to have you, Dr. Galuza. We're going to be talking about 5 minutes with a Darwinist.
Yes, we are.
That sounds kind of scary. I'm not sure what to make of that kind of a title.
Well, it could be scary. I guess if you lived in Texas, you know, they'll take 5 minutes with a Darwinist and they'll teach them a thing or two. But
wow.
We're not going to talk about that today.
Okay, that's not what we mean.
We're going to give a how-to talk. How to talk with your friends in just 5 minutes about creation and evolution.
Well, that sounds like something that really anybody could learn to do.
So we actually have a little memory device for everybody, and if you can remember fluff, you can hopefully use this. And I use this all the time. If I do a radio interview, I go through my little fluff checklist right here, and we're going to teach people how to use this as well. It begins with the F, showing that evolution is more than air than substance, that we want to focus the discussion.
Okay.
Then we want to work into our vocabulary this new phrase, less than persuaded.
Okay.
We want to talk about a couple unobserved important events. Then finally, failed mechanism design, and wrap up with some freedoms on the positive end, some freedoms found in creation science.
So by memorizing the acronym FLUFF, it should help me to speak with my Darwinist friends, my evolutionary-minded friends, and to give them a reason for the hope that I have, right?
Exactly. I hope it does. Hope it points you that way. First of all, we want to focus the discussion. Focus, get right to the point, because you know, time is limited. So we need to define a couple terms right off. And the good news is that's all we need to define, just 2 terms.
Well, I can remember 2 terms, so we're good.
Well, good. And we want to use a reputable source because, you know, someone might ask you, where did you get that definition? So the very first thing we need to define, obviously, is evolution. What is evolution? Now, some people say it just means change or change over time. Well, those are very vague definitions. But a very good source, the National Association of Biology Teachers, they claim, and this is good, the diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution. Now that gets to the heart of the issue. Where did all these creatures come from? So they're telling us that the diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution. So if I was talking to my evolutionist friend, I might say, you know, when I'm talking about evolution, I'm talking about something which is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth.
Good, that's good, because that gets away from, you know, sometimes you'll hear, you know, the minor changes in a bird or in a dog or in bacteria, you know, minor changes. But when they are saying, the people who believe it, that no, this is how all life and all the different forms of life, that's what we mean, well then that's something that we can speak to.
Exactly, that's exactly right. But when you think about that, that's a pretty extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims demand some pretty extraordinary evidence. So if they're going to explain all of these different kinds of creatures, we should see a lot of evidence about it, but not just any evidence, we should see scientific evidence. So that takes us to the next term we need to define, and that is science. Short and conventional, something that we all learned in school is, I hold that science is based on observation and testing. Observation and testing. So very, very quickly, we've limited the discussion. We said evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth based on science, which is based on observation and testing. Very, very objective. And we've narrowed the discussion down considerably, just like that, right off the bat. That's very, very important. Otherwise, you might be chasing your tail all day long.
Very good. And science, then, we're talking about what sometimes is said, the scientific method, where you can test and observe and see something and, predict the results and all of that.
Exactly. That's exactly what the scientific method is, observation and testing. Now, some evolutionists want to change that definition to say natural explanations only, but this is the real definition of science, something based on observation and testing. Which takes us to the L, less than persuaded, a new phrase we want to work in the vocabulary, less than persuaded.
Now, she looks less than persuaded to me.
Well, I would say she looks less than persuaded. In fact, I don't think men can really make a face like that.
My son could, but there's few people that can.
A few can. But she clearly is skeptical of what's being told to her. And that's what we want to be. We want to be the ones who are a little skeptical here. We don't want to get into an argument. We don't want to come out and say this, well, I just don't believe in evolution. That doesn't get you anywhere, because clearly they're going to respond with, well, I don't believe in creation.
Yeah, and we're not talking about belief, we're talking about truth.
That's exactly right.
I might not believe something, but maybe I should believe it if it's true. And so to get to, when you shift that, you've sort of given ground already.
Exactly. So we don't even want to use that word belief in this sense. We want to give the indication that we've been listening carefully to our teachers, we've been listening to what we've been taught on television, but it hasn't fully persuaded us yet that evolution explains the diversity of life on Earth.
So this is the phrase that we say, right? Well, I'm less than persuaded.
Exactly. You would say this to your friend. You would say, I've been listening to what my teachers have been telling me, and I've read the textbook, and I'm less than persuaded that the evidence I'm seeing really explains the diversity of life on Earth. And hopefully we don't get into an argument by saying that, because when it says we're less than persuaded, it kind of gives the indication that we've been listening carefully, but we are still skeptical of the evidence. And it also implies, very importantly here, a willingness to listen to the other person, a willingness to be convinced. And if you're willing, you as the believer, if you're willing to listen, maybe your unbelieving friend will be willing to listen to you as well. So less than persuaded is a very disarming phrase. It doesn't get us into an argument. It tells that we've been listening, and hopefully they will be listening too. Well, even this chimp is a little less than persuaded.
He looks less than persuaded.
That's exactly right. He's a little skeptical that he's related to you and me.
He doesn't know where the bananas are right now.
That's right. He doesn't even know whether he wants to be related to us or not. Well, anyway, evolution, the reason why I'm less than persuaded is because it's based on a lot of extrapolation. You see something in the present and you extrapolate, which means you imagine what it was like in the past. So it is based on a lot of stories, as it says there, speculation, special effects, particularly in this day and age of computers, where they can see like a wolf-like creature walk into the ocean and by the marvels of computers morph into a whale right before your children's eyes.
Yeah, nice little cartoon, but it has nothing to do with what really is going on.
Exactly. So these are not really based on observation, and yet this is exactly what I see in the classroom. I see it on television. I really hear it all the time. I'm less than persuaded. That takes us up to the U. The good news is only two unobserved, very important events. I mean, if evolution was true, you have to get life going, and you have to be able to change it from one kind to another kind. So you probably guessed these are the two unobserved events.
Okay.
First, a natural origin of life. An unobserved natural origin of life. You can't cheat. You can't invoke God. You can't bring God in a little bit. You have to explain it as if there were no God, as if life could somehow arise from the primitive conditions that are on the earth. Well, obviously, This isn't based on observation and testing because nobody saw it happen. And nobody's even close to duplicating. In fact, nobody even really knows where to begin to explain it. Are you going to begin to explain the natural origin of life, explaining the origin of reproduction, or the origin of metabolism, or the origin of adaptability, or the origin of growth? All of these things which living creatures do, you have to explain all of those if you're going to explain a natural origin of life. So nobody is even close to adequately explaining it here. In fact, Scientific American reported just a few years ago on the world's largest group of origin of life researchers, and this is what they reported. Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue of how life began.
Well, that doesn't really sound like they're interested in the truth. They should be doing something with that rather than sort of making a joke about it.
Exactly, or trying to conceal it from the creationists. I mean, we know how to read anyway, and we'll be able to figure this out. So nobody is even close to actually explaining this.
It's sort of just a little way to disparage the creationists in saying it that way.
Exactly.
Their ignorance, they're making it sort of into a weapon.
Exactly.
Very tricky, though, speaking
But it's
of
their ignorance as well. But this is the one that really is at the heart of evolution. They don't have a mechanism that changes one creature into a fundamentally different kind. Nobody has ever observed that happen. There's not, and this is very important, I could say this with authority and your friends could say it too, there is not a single scientific paper published anywhere on the planet, that documents one creature changing into another kind of creature.
So we're not talking about, the size and shapes of beaks on finches or something like that. We're talking about a dog turning into a cat, or a cow into a camel, or something like that.
Exactly. How you would explain that type of transition. Evolution is not an account of similarity between creatures. It's really an account of how they would transition from one to another. And now this paper was published just a few years ago. It's Evolution in Action, a 50,000 generation account. And it's a tribute to Charles Darwin. It's reporting on the longest running experiment on evolution in the world, and that's in the University of Michigan. And after 50,000 generations of reduplicating a bacteria called E. coli, which is in your gut, it's still E. coli.
So even with their, and really this isn't sort of natural, this is them in a controlled environment trying to do everything they can to promote some kind of change, it's still not able to happen.
Exactly, not able to happen. And that's why they don't have a good mechanism of explaining the design that they see in that E. coli bacteria. Now, the word design is not a bad word because everybody recognizes the design. All scientists agree that when you look at living creatures, they look like they're designed. As a creationist, my explanation is this. It looks designed because there was a real designer behind it. The real designer is the cause of these things. Well, evolutionists will claim that it looks designed, but only looks like it was designed, but really wasn't designed. It only appears like it was designed, but it kind of doesn't. It wasn't really designed.
That's interesting because, so here we have to have evidence, something that you see with your eye that looks to be a certain way, and you have to say, no, what the evidence is saying isn't true because I just know it's not true. It can't be true.
It can't be true, exactly.
And that's because doesn't sound like science to me.
No, the mechanism itself is really, really weak. Of course, they're going to say that it's based on what we all learned in school, mutations coupled to their process of natural selection. The problem why this doesn't really explain evolution is there's two main failures with this, and our readers and listeners could come up with this. Mutations, totally random. And all you really need to know when talking about your friends and with your friends is that mutations cause disease. Mutations tear things down. Nobody wants mutations.
Birth defects, horrible things.
Exactly. So how can this really plausibly be the mechanism for introducing variability? And then natural selection, it's hard to get around this one, but just say to your friends, show me the selector. Show me the selector. You know what that'll point out? That this really isn't a mechanism of design. It's a projection of selective ability onto nature that it really doesn't have. And if it doesn't have this volitional ability, if it doesn't really have agency, which is pointed out when you say, show me the selector, and they know they can't show you that, they'll say, well, there really isn't a selector. It's just a metaphor. It's just a figure of speech. And then we can say, well, figures of speech really can't design things.
You know, it's funny, I've seen so many specials or read things where, you know, well, nature or does this, or by nature the creature does this. And in a sense, nature becomes their substitute for a designer.
Exactly. Nature becomes the substitute God. The natural selector, since selection always applies volition, becomes their substitute agent for God. Well, we don't want to just point out the problem with this. We want to replace it with something better. So what do I have as a better explanation for that? Well, very, very quickly, we could point out to them that living things show all of the patterns and the hallmarks of design. Now, what are those patterns? People don't know about them, but you really do. You just don't think about them. If you went out to the car and you started up and you lifted up the hood and looked at the engine, you would see patterns of design. You would see multiple parts working together for a purpose. You would see precise timing. You would see fit and finish. You would see a specific sequence of assembly, living things.
And if you looked at other car engines or even boat engines, you would still see some similarities, same sort of concept of creating energy from fuel.
Exactly, you would see all of those things. Obviously, we and man-made things are complex enough that the probability of getting those through random changes or mutations of things is exceedingly small. And this is very objective. We could do a test on that. And then also, on top of that, we can show systems with all or nothing unity. Meaning this, unless all of the essential parts are there at the right place, at the right time, in the right amounts, you are going to get nothing. You are not going to get any type of function. And someone might say, well, what should I talk about on that? Jump right to reproduction. Everybody knows how it works. Everybody understands the basics. But unless you have all of the parts, not just the large anatomical parts, but even the molecular parts, you do not get offspring. And if you don't have offspring, evolution comes to a screeching halt. Right then. So I might wrap this all up by saying, you know, when I put the two mechanisms of design, random mutations coupled to a mystical selector, head to head by looking at all these patterns of design and the probability and all or nothing unity, I think intelligent design offers a more reasonable and rational explanation.
Let's hold that thought right there, because all we've done really is sort of answer them. We're not giving our arguments yet, which I want you to do when we come back after these messages. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Origins. We're talking to Dr. Randy Galuza, who's been sharing some intelligent ways that you can speak to people about creation. Randy, you said this battle between evolution and creation is a head-to-head test. Can you illustrate that for us?
Well, yes. When we were talking about comparing those two mechanisms of design, I said when we put them together as a head-to-head way, really that was kind of a shameless way for me to put a picture of my son right here.
Oh, wow.
And this
Making
was
the tackle.
Making the tackle. This was on the front page of the newspaper, and the crosstown rival. This is the goal line right here.
Oh, wow.
And this is like the hit that was heard around the world. He just stopped him right in his tracks.
Fantastic.
Right there. Anyway, that's a very, very proud moment for Mom and I as well, making that great stop. Anyway, we want to end our conversation with our evolutionary friends on a positive subject.
Okay, so
Subject.
we've critiqued and shown, you know, a lot of holes in why what they're saying can't be true. Now we want to give them the answer, right?
Exactly. So we're going to show some freedoms found in creation science. What awaits them if they could be a little more open to understanding design from a design standpoint and not from a magical standpoint. So, freedom to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And we have that freedom. I'm not really worried, and I don't think you are as well, that anything's going to come up within science and overturn what we're thinking. But not so with some of the evolutionists. Their naturalistic view binds their mind. And look what Scott Todd said just a few years ago. He said, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded because it is not naturalistic. Doesn't say not because it's based on observation and testing, but this doesn't look really open to follow the evidence wherever it leads. I like the freedom not to have to go that way. I like the freedom from magical words, which I find in scientific literature all the time. Words like arose, emerged, appeared. One of these burst onto the scene. There it is. That's one of my favorites there. You know, when people use these words in evolutionary literature, they're skipping over all kinds of missing data. Real scientists don't just say things arise or it appeared. I like the freedom that is found not having to use all these magical words.
I really like the phrase there, a miracle of evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, the contradiction in that is just too rich for me to not comment on.
Exactly. And I picked every one of these out of evolutionary scientific literature. I didn't make any of them up. I pulled them right from literature. I like the freedom from the self-delusion that every time I see the complexity in my hand, I have to convince myself that it only looks like it was designed, but really wasn't. In fact, one of the co-discoverers of DNA, Francis Crick, said biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. They have to constantly reinforce that thought in their mind.
Otherwise, you might actually allow yourself to believe what you're seeing is true.
Exactly. It's really kind of hiding from the truth, like this ostrich is burying its head in the sand, but scientists could do the exact same thing, kind of hide from that truth and not look at it. And then finally, I like the freedom from religious conclusions that are masquerading as science. Now, there's a religious phrase, but it's got kind of a science-y flavor to it. The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Now, that kind of sounds science-y, the cosmos. But don't argue with them over this. The best way to answer these kinds of things is just ask a question. If he was still alive, I might say, what experiment did you do?
Yes.
And what paper did you publish it in to show that the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? That would be a long experiment.
Just the hubris of that
To
statement.
do that, and that's clearly not a scientific statement. Another one, Michael Shermer records, a famous evolutionist named Richard Dawkins. He says, in one of those most existentially penetrating statements made by a scientist, that's the key phrase here. He's speaking on the authority of science. Richard Dawkins concluded the universe observed has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's a religious statement, dressed up in scientific garb. He has not done any experiments to prove any of these things. And Stephen Hawking, reported to be one of the most intelligent men in the world, he claims that there is no heaven. This paper says Stephen Hawking, the world-renowned theoretical physicist, finds no room in heaven for his vision of the cosmos. The 69-year-old says there is no afterlife for broken-down computers. The computer he's referring to is your brain. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark.
Wow.
Well, in order for him to know this by the scientific method, he would have had to die, go across, say there's nothing here, come back, and report his findings that there's nothing here. This is a religious statement masquerading as science. So, if we only have 5 minutes to talk with our friends, we want to very, very quickly focus the discussion. Define what? 2 terms. Evolution explains the diversity of life on Earth, and science based on...
See, I wanted you to see that.
That's right. Observation and testing.
That's right.
Work into our vocabulary. This phrase. This is a good one.
Less than persuaded. I'm less than persuaded.
That's right.
I say that phrase as I'm really listening to them. I'm not just saying that, but I'm really listening to them, and I'm trying to show them that what they're saying is not conclusive, that it's not, they haven't made the case.
Exactly.
So,
because of 2 unobserved important events, a natural origin of life and a mechanism to change one creature to a fundamentally type of creature.
and this is why we're less than persuaded, because those 2 things they can't demonstrate.
Exactly.
And there's, like you said, there's no one on earth that has written, hey, this is how a creature turns into another creature, this is how we've seen it, this is how we've tested it, because it's never happened.
It's never happened, and there isn't a scientific paper documenting it. We're also less than persuaded because of the failed mechanism design, appealing to mutations coupled to selection, something which destroys information, something which causes disease, coupled to a mystical selector. When you just say, show me the selector, it's really, really not there. And then the freedom found in creation science, freedom from magical words, freedom to follow the evidence wherever it leads, and the freedom from religious statements masquerading as science. We can do this in 5 minutes. Hopefully they'll listen to us, and maybe after that we can point them to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Fantastic, Randy. I really like this, and it really should help our viewers to have the courage to begin to speak to their friends. Thank you for being on the program.
Well, thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure.
And I want to thank you, our audience, for being with us today. Many Christians, I think, are hesitant to speak with their evolutionary-minded or their Darwinian-minded friends. They don't know what to say. They think maybe the discussion is too complex. How do I know where to begin? Well, on our program today, you learned that in just 5 minutes, and just remembering a few simple things, you can point out to your friends that what they're believing really isn't based on the truth. It's really not going where the evidence leads. In fact, if they go where the evidence leads, they'll see that there must be a creator. It just goes to show you once again that we know what the Bible says is true, and the proof, it's all around you. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Origins, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. For a DVD of this series, you can order online or send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling. And write to Origins Program, number 1811, Cornerstone Network, Wall, Pennsylvania, 15148.
This presentation was made possible by the faithful prayers and financial support of you, our Cornerstone family.